Welcome along everybody to our big GCN preview of what is the second Grand Tour of the 2020 season and arguably the most beautiful. It's the Giro d'Italia.
The seasons are changing, as is customary for the Giro d'Italia, except this time it's autumn turning into winter rather than spring turning into summer. Now the Giro is famous for some pretty cold conditions, and I think this year it's going to be quite the same. It's going to be a challenge for the peloton.
Yeah, but one that we are very much looking forward to watching on our screens. Coming up, everything that you need to know about the route, which will be equally as tough as the conditions that the riders will face, plus all the main protagonists taking part. And of course, we will be making our GCN predictions, which have been going rather well this year, so you never know, we might pick another winner.
Of course, we shouldn't speak too soon, Dan.
No. Now, before we get on to all the details of this year's Giro d'Italia route, we are very pleased to say that we have live coverage of every single stage of the race over on Race Pass, which is of course on the GCN app.
Now we must stress that territory restrictions do apply, so if you want to check out what you can watch, then please look at the racing calendar, which you can find in a link in the description below.
If you do have access to the live coverage, it will also mean you've got access to long form highlights, which will come soon after each stage. If you don't, well, all other Race Pass territories will have short form highlights that you can watch, and you'll also be able to check out the breakaway. Guests include Brian Smith, Bradley Wiggins and Sean Kelly, just as they did for the Tour de France, and that will be up every evening after each Giro d'Italia stage. Right, on to the route itself then, and there's a lot more time trialling kilometres than there were at the Tour de France, which of course finished very recently. In total, 3 individual time trial stages. The race is bookended by short 15-kilometre time trials that come on the first and final days, and then on the stage 14 we've got a longer test of 34 kilometres. So in total, just over 64 k's of individual tests over a route that totals just under 3,500 kilometres.
And what a mixed bag those stages are. We kick things off with a 15-kilometre TT that is predominantly downhill.
Our kind of stage that, Connor, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'd be confident of getting inside the time limit on stage 1.
After a big bag of chips. Well, anyway, after the big bag of chips, we then have a lumpy stage with a rather punchy finish. Then we have a mountain stage with a summit finish, and then a predominantly flat stage, aside from the fact that there's an 18-kilometre climb with a 4% gradient right in the middle of it.
In my book, that is not a flat stage, particularly these days. Right, well, despite the fact that there is something for everyone in those opening 4 stages, we think that stage 3 is the must-watch of all of them. It starts in Enna and finishes on Etna, Mount Etna to be precise, and who can forget the 1-2 there of Esteban Chavez and Simon Yates just a couple of years ago.
With a stage finish featuring a summit finish climbing 1,200 metres up Mount Etna with a penultimate kilometre of which averages 10% in gradient. This will be a chance for the GC riders to really stretch their legs. Will we see an eruption on the mount? Will we see any GC riders take the pink jersey?
Well, you've got a lava mountaintop finish that comes early in a Grand Tour, haven't you?
You do, Dan.
I'm so sorry about that. Anyway, we should quickly move on. After that Grande Partenza, which takes up the first 4 stages really on Sicily, the race does of course move over to the mainland, and at that point we have got 3 hilly stages which are separated by one pan-flat stage that comes on stage 7. That one finishes in Brindisi, which is on the Adriatic coast on the heel of Italy, and from that point onwards in the race many of the following stages hug the Adriatic coastline, and so from that point of view you'd think it'd be mainly flat, but it's not entirely true, because on stage 9 we have got a mountaintop finish up Roccaraso.
Yep, stages 5 and 9 are hideous stages, whereas 6 and 8 are flat stages, which are suited to the sprinters, where we will see the first points for the Maglia Rosa mopped up.
Stages 11 and 13 look to be 2 further opportunities for the sprinters at the race, although as I said, those stages often hug the coastline, particularly stage 11, so you never know. We might even feature some crosswinds on those days, you never know your luck.
You rarely get crosswinds in Italy though, do you, Dan?
No, you don't see many crosswinds. I don't even know the reason for that.
Please let us know in the comments. Yeah, let us know in the comments if you know. But anyway, we can only hope. And stages 10 and 12 are hillier transitional stages as the race heads north through Italy, with stage 12 being the hillier of the two, which is maybe one for a breakaway group to get away and contest the finish.
It is. And then we've got the third weekend of the race, which is going to be a big one for the GC riders, because stage 14 on that Saturday, it's the aforementioned 34-kilometre individual time trial. So a place where somebody like Geraint Thomas is definitely going to look to make up some time on his GC rivals that are pure climbers. And no rest for the wicked the following day, because we've got a big mountain test up in the Dolomites of northeastern Italy. So 3 second category climbs precede a final mountaintop finish, which is particularly tough. It comes at Piancavallo, 13.8 kilometres long with an average gradient of over 8%. Definitely one to watch. It comes on the third Sunday of the race.
After the second and final rest day, the riders face a pretty mountainous final week.
Pretty mountainous and pretty brutal, isn't it, that final week? In fact, I was just looking, and of all of the road stages in the final week of this year's Giro d'Italia, there's only one that's less than 200 kilometres in distance. And that one's 198, which presumably also has a rather long neutralised section just before it, which will tip it over the 200 mark anyway.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Dan, I'm still trying to erase the memories from last year's edition of the race.
It's much easier talking about the race, Conor, isn't it, than doing it?
It is. I think I was crying a few times when I saw those stages. But anyway, stage 16 is a rather lumpy affair and will probably suit a breakaway, I think, with a few lumpy climbs, and it actually tackles the same ascent 3 times in the closing kilometres. Now, stage 19 is a flat, long one, and it features 253 kilometres, one which will suit the sprinters.
253 Ks. I mean, it's such a brutal final week. I'm sure the riders would have preferred a slightly shorter, flat stage to deal with. In that final week, though, the toughest stages are 17, 18 and 20. Stage 17 finishes up the Madonna di Campiglio. There's another summit finish on stage 18. And stage 20 is something else. We'll have more on that later. But just goes to show that, as is quite traditional actually in the modern days of the Giro d'Italia, it's very much backloaded. And we've seen very recently, haven't we, that the story of a Grand Tour can be completely rewritten right at the very end of it. Something Primož Roglič knows only too well, doesn't he?
It's too soon, Dan.
Maybe it is too soon, yes. Yeah, the wounds haven't quite healed yet, have they? So I'm sorry about that, Primož. But about stage 20, it is the one stage in that final week on the road which is under 200 kilometres, but that doesn't make it easier.
Dan, it looks absolutely brutal. Now, the stage runs from Alba to Sestriere across only 198 kilometres. However, it features 5,364 metres of climbing.
Nice. It basically climbs from the gun as well, doesn't it? And they go from not far above sea level to the top of the Colle dell'Agnello. So 2,600 metres of elevation gain from the off. And the peak of that climb is at 2,733 metres above sea level, which is high. 5.4 kilometres in total, like that, on that 198 kilometre stage. I feel sorry for you guys. I hope you get through it all right. In fact, you've got experience of the Colle dell'Agnello as a cyclotourist, haven't you? A couple of years back. But you did it in September rather than October, and it was already cold then.
Yeah, it was actually freezing at the top even then, Dan. But luckily, we had some digestivos just as we crested the top of the climb.
To warm yourselves up?
Yeah, it made things a bit more pleasant.
Well, poor old Larry not only had to be with you in that cyclotourist moment, but he's also racing in the Giro this year, isn't he?
Yeah,
good luck, Larry.
I'll celebrate. I'll have a digestivo for him.
We'll be thinking of you. Do you one of the emojis of someone being sick?
There's a few good emojis to describe this stage, really.
Sorry about that. We've just stopped laughing. So we're going to start another part of the preview now. Most of the laughter came from me, actually, after Conor just sent Larry a text, which was basically 6 emojis, 3 mountains, should have been 4, by the way, and then 3 crying-faced laughter emojis as well.
He's told me he's going to wear his aero socks.
Yes.
You'll need them. Anyway, from there, after you descend Col d'Agnello, you'll descend into France and take on the Col d'Isorde, and then tackle a shorter climb, Mont Genèvre.
Yeah, short. Yeah, only 12 kilometres, Mont Genèvre. Much easier, isn't it?
Either climb could be a launch pad for a GC rider to take back a chunk of time in the closing sections of the Giro.
And it's not even finished there, although Larry and everybody else will be very pleased to hear that the last climb is the shortest. It's only 11.5 kilometres left to climb up to Sestriere. We really shouldn't laugh, Conor, because that is such a tough day in the saddle. I almost can't believe the organisers are making the riders face it, but I shall be watching to see how everybody gets on.
The 21st and final stage of this year's Giro is a 15.6 kilometre TT, which could prove to be decisive, especially if gaps are as tight as in the Tour de France when we saw that rather now famous TT on stage 20.
Well, imagine if they are really tight, the gaps, because then the GC riders are going to have to go flat out on that last time trial, having ridden up 5,400 metres of elevation gain the day before. That's got to hurt.
It is. No ham and pineapple pizza for them.
The day before, no. Just the pineapple.
Yeah. Now, the COVID procedures in this race, we've heard, are going to be a little bit different to the Tour de France, where there was a 2-strike and you're out rule employed. Instead, there will be a strict isolation procedure in place at the Giro d'Italia.
I don't think everybody expected all of the Tour de France to get to the finish in Paris, so it was brilliant to see everybody get to that point, or at least those that weren't injured or didn't crash, etc., etc. Nothing due to COVID-19. Slightly different protocol, as Conor said, at the Giro d'Italia, but from what I have seen, read and heard, Italian authorities are dealing with this thing far better than pretty much every other country in the world. So I'm pretty confident they will make it through to the final day. Right, well that was the route, and they are the rules. Don't break them. We'll get on to the riders, or at least the main ones taking part this year now. And I think we should probably start with the man on the start line who's had the most success at this race over the years, Vincenzo Neberly. Now, he hasn't shown the best of forms since racing resumed on August the 1st, but he's got a bit of a history of that sort of thing, hasn't he? Not performing magnificently well on the lead up to his main goal of the year, but getting his form right at just the right time.
That being said though, Dan, he hasn't won a Grand Tour since 2016 when he did win the Giro d'Italia.
True, although he did come second, runner-up at last year's Giro, didn't he? And he finished 5 hours and 36 minutes in front of...
Me.
Yeah. Hey!
But he is 35 now, Dan.
Yes, but remember Chris Horner won the Vuelta a few years ago at the age of 60, didn't he?
Okay, well, we can expect him to finish there or thereabouts, but the big favourite for this race is Geraint Thomas, despite the fact that he's only finished 80th at the Giro d'Italia in the past.
Yeah, probably shouldn't point towards that result though, should we? Because he's come on leaps and bounds since his 80th place. In fact, he was looking good at this very race back in 2017, but then he was in that awful crash on the lead into Blockhouse, which was the first mountaintop finish that year. And just over 12 months later, went on to win the Tour de Bloom in France. So he's come on leaps and bounds, and as you said, will start as favourite. And he does look to be on the right track at Imola, in particular, if you will pardon the pun, the World Time Trial Championships there, and indeed at Tirreno Adriatico just before that, where he finished second overall.
Behind Simon Yates of Mitchelton Scott, who has got unfinished business at this race. If you remember back in 2018 when he was looking so promising, right up there with the favourites, however, he finished outside the top 20.
Yeah. A reminder of how cruel the sport of cycling can be, isn't it? Although I do think he learnt a lot from that experience and has, of course, won a Grand Tour since then, that same year, in fact, at the Vuelta a España. And this year, he's got a very strong Mitchelton Scott team around him who are all working for the same common goal, so he's got a very good chance indeed. You'd imagine that Jakob Fuglsang will also be the team leader at Astana, although the Russian Alexander Vlasov has looked incredible in the few races that he's done so far this year, so he might get a bit of protection too.
Fuglsang is an interesting one though, isn't he? He always goes into a Grand Tour as one of the favourites, despite the fact he's only finished in the top 10 on one occasion when he finished 7th in the 2013 Tour de France. And this is his 15th Grand Tour. Yeah.
It's quite incredible, that stat, isn't it? Because like you said, he does always go into it as one of the favourites. He is getting on a bit now though, he's 35, isn't he, Fuglsang now?
Age is just a number, Dan, as you should know.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying that I keep hearing recently, 40 is the new 20, apparently. Moving quickly on, shall we? Steven Kruijswijk, another man with unfinished business at this race. We already talked about the fact that he crashed on the descent of the Colle dell'Agnello when he looked dead cert to win the 2016 edition of the race. He's not only got that, but also the fact that he missed out on this year's Tour de France to bounce back from this year.
I'd love to see him take this race, actually, Dan. I think he's such a hard-working rider and he really deserves to win a Grand Tour. And let's remember, he did finish third in the Tour de France last year. So he's got the pedigree.
He has, and I'd agree with you there. I'd also love to see him win a Grand Tour before the end of his career. Not as old as I thought, actually. He's 33 now, so he's still got a little bit of time to take that win before the end of his career. Right, beyond that, well, there's Rafał Majka Bora-Hansgrohe, who has historically performed very well at the Giro d'Italia, although it feels like a bit of a long shot to say that he might win the race this year. Ivan Ramiro Sosa, the talented Colombian climber who rides for Ineos Grenadiers, although you would imagine that he will be riding solely at the service of Geraint Thomas.
Now, before we move on to the sprinters, a quick nod to the heroic riders who will be competing in the Giro d'Italia after having just finished the Tour de France. 6 weeks of racing in 8 weeks is not for the faint-hearted or the weak of legs. Now, 3 of those riders are actually sprinters, starting with Elia Viviani for Cofidis, who will be hoping to salvage something from his season. Peter Sagan of Bora, who will be actually starting in the Giro d'Italia for the first time, rather surprisingly. Yeah. And also Caleb Ewan, who won 2 stages at the Giro d'Italia last year.
Yeah, if they take the start line, which we think they are going to. Caleb also winning, of course, 2 stages of the Tour this year. Other riders who are potentially doubling up in terms of the Grand Tours are Andre Amador, the Costa Rican of Ineos Grenadiers, Marc Soler, the Spaniard from Movistar, who also competed at the World Championships between those 2 Grand Tours. And also, potentially, we are going to see Miguel Angel Lopez on the start line for Astana. Although, unlike last year, the likelihood is that he'll be in a supporting role at the Grand Tour here this year. Beyond that, in terms of sprinters, well, there's Arnaud Démare of Groupama FDJ, the French champion, who managed to amass 9 wins in August alone. And who knows what he might have achieved at the Tour de France had he been selected by his team for that race. Fernando Gaviria is also on the start line for UAE Team Emirates, and he's shown some very good form so far this year. And Davide Ballerini, the Italian of De Koning Quick-Step, who's been sprinting well, who incidentally also have a couple of long-shot outsiders for the GC in the form of Fausto Masnada, the Italian, and João Almeida, the young Portuguese rider.
Jakub Mareczko will be hoping to finally convert all his smaller wins into one big one at his home Grand Tour. And then there's Rudy Barbier for Israel's Startup Nation, my own teammate. I think he's going to go well on the really hectic bunch finishes, the more dangerous.
Former teammate, Conor, because you've left the sport now.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that was in the past.
You're with us now, Conor.
Yeah, sorry. Now, there's also Michael Matthews, who's not just a pure sprinter, but will also challenge on a number of the stages here at this year's Giro. And he proved his form recently at the World Championships.
Yeah, he could win a whole multitude of stages, Michael Matthews, couldn't he? In his final year, actually, for Team Sunweb. Now, since there are 3 individual time trials at the race, to remind you, we should probably give a nod to the riders who specialise in that particular discipline. None more so, obviously, at the moment than Filippo Ganna of Ineos Grenadiers. Hard to see anybody else pulling on the first pink jersey of the race, really, isn't it, with that downhill time trial, despite the fact that it's his first Grand Tour. 2 of the riders who will be looking to stop him doing that are his teammates, Geraint Thomas and Rowan Dennis, the double world champion, if he's on the start line. Other riders in that vein include a current and former world hour record holder, should I say, Victor Campenaerts of Lotto Soudal and Alex Dowsett, who's running for Israel's Startup Nation. Jos van Emden, he's won a time trial at the Giro d'Italia before, and who knows, maybe even Brandon McNulty of UAE Team Emirates might spring a surprise. Right, so that was the route, you've got the rules, you know the riders, and now, therefore, it is time for our GCN predictions. And I'm feeling the pressure a bit somewhat here, Conor, because having been so amazingly successful in my predictions for the World Championships and the Tour de France before that, I feel the need to get it right again today.
Here we go, I knew you mentioned it. I knew you'd bring this up, Dan.
Well, of course I'm going to bring it up.
Anyway, my prediction, my shout for the race, I'm going to go with the Danish. I'm going for Jakob Fuglsang.
The man who has never finished in the top 6 of a Grand Tour in his life and who is 35 years old is your pick for this race?
Yeah, he's waited long enough, and I think it's his time. He's going to take it. Danish winner of the Giro.
Interesting. Well, I wouldn't put it past him, but I don't think he's going to win. I'm going to pick somebody else. And I'm going to go for Simon Yates. He was in my mind before we started this preview, and I did start to question myself when I looked at that stage 20, once I'd stopped laughing again. But in history, of course, he didn't do so well in the last week of the Giro d'Italia a couple of years ago. But he is more mature now, both physically and mentally, and on top form with a great team. This is his year in Italy. in my mind. No pressure, Simon, but I've got a reputation to uphold from the last couple of weeks, so please win the race. Right, let's head over to our international colleagues now to see who their picks are for this year's Giro.
Hi everyone, here Sebastián Aedo from GCN en Español, and my prediction for this Giro d'Italia is that the winner will be Jakob Fuglsang.
My predictions for the Giro d'Italia winner will be Superman Lopez.
For the Giro, my heart say Nibali, of course, but my head say Jakob Fuglsang.
All bases pretty much covered, I would say there. The benefit of having so many presenters on GCN these days all over the world. As ever, we'd love to know who your picks are for this year's Giro d'Italia. If you're watching on YouTube, you can shove them in the comments below. Otherwise, get in contact with us on Twitter. Still feeling confident with yours, Conor?
Yeah, I'm feeling confident, Dan, yeah. I'm going to be eating my ham and pineapple pizza while he wins.
You're just going to enjoy watching it as opposed to riding it, I think, aren't you? Whatever happens.
I think so, yeah.
I think we all are. Don't forget you can catch live coverage if you're in the right territory, but wherever you are, make sure you tune in for the breakaway.